The air carried the crisp bite of autumn pine and the faint, earthy tang of damp soil when I first spotted the trouble. It was a quiet Tuesday morning, my boots crunching along the gravel path that wound behind my property in Willow Creek, a suburban enclave tucked into the rolling hills of central Ohio. At 62, retired from a 35-year career as a stormwater engineer with Franklin County, I'd made this walk a ritual way to keep my mind sharp and my legs moving. The trail, maintained by the Willow Creek Homeowners Association, wasn't just a path. It was a lifeline for joggers, dog walkers, and kids biking to the community park. But that morning, something felt off, like the land was holding its breath. I'd spent decades studying water, how it moves, how it carves, how it destroys when ignored. My career had taken me from flood-ravaged riverbanks to city planning boards, where I'd earned my stripes as a certified hydraulic engineer. I'd seen culverts collapse, levees breach, and entire neighborhoods drown because someone, somewhere, thought they could outsmart gravity. So when I noticed the new additions to the trailless shiny concrete bridge, a paved parking lot, and a cluster of wooden benches bolted into soft soil, I didn't just see upgrades. I saw a disaster waiting to unfold. The bridge, sleek and wide, had no culvert beneath it to channel runoff. The parking lot's asphalt sloped toward the trail instead of away, funneling water into a low basin where the earth was already spongy. Worst of all, the natural swaley, a shallow ditch I'd tended for years to guide rainwater safely downhill, was now buried under a layer of decorative mulch and trampled sod. The HOA had been busy, all right, but their enthusiasm screamed photo ops for the community newsletter, not hydrology. I knew what water did when its logic was disrupted. It didn't negotiate. It rewrote the rules. That night, I sat at my oak desk, the glow of my laptop casting shadows across the room, and typed an email to the HOA board. It was polite but firm, the kind of tone I'd honed over years of dealing with bureaucrats and developers. Dear Willow Creek HOA Board, as a homeowner and retired hydraulic engineer with over 3 decades of experience in stormwater management, I am deeply concerned about recent trail modifications. The absence of a culvert under the new bridge, improper grading of the parking area, and obstruction of the existing swale create significant flood risks. Attached is a preliminary drainage plan I've drafted at no cost to address these issues. These changes are straightforward but critical to prevent damage and liability. I'm happy to discuss this at the next meeting or in person. Respectfully, Thomas J. Carver, P. Ret. The attachment was a 7-page PDF featuring 4 diagrams, 2 flow models, and a simulation that showed how a modest 3-inch rain could turn the trail into a muddy torrent. I hit send and leaned back, expecting at least a courtesy reply. A week passed. Nothing. Then, on a rainy Thursday, an email from Margaret Hensley, the HOA president, landed in my inbox. Her tone was polished but sharp, like a knife wrapped in silk. Mr. Carver, I appreciate your interest in our community. The board has reviewed our contractors' assessments and is confident in their expertise. We kindly ask that residents refrain from interfering with approved projects. Best regards, Margaret Hensley, President, Willow Creek HOA. I read it twice, my jaw tightening. No mention of my concerns. No acknowledgement of the diagrams. Refrain from interfering stung like a slap, as if my expertise was a nuisance. I wasn't shocked. This was the same HOA that once fined a neighbor for planting unsightly wildflowers and debated for 3 meetings whether mailboxes should be matte black or glossy. To them, credentials only mattered if they came with a paid invoice. But I wasn't about to let it go. The land was speaking, and I'd learned long ago to listen. I printed 15 copies of my drainage plan, spiral-bound them at the local print shop, and brought them to the next HOA meeting. The community center was a sterile box of fluorescent lights and folding chairs. Margaret stood at the front, her silver blonde hair immaculate, flanked by Roger, the treasurer, who always looked like he'd just bitten a lemon, and Ellen, the events coordinator, clutching a clipboard like it was her shield. Mr. Carver, Margaret said as I approached the microphone during public comment, her smile tight. Please keep it brief. We have a packed agenda. I nodded, holding up my report. I'll be quick. As I outlined in my email, the trail's new layout is a flood risk. The parking lot's grading is off, the bridge lacks a culvert, and the swale is blocked. This area sits in a floodplain buffer. Without corrections, a major storm will wash it all away. Margaret's smile didn't waver. We appreciate your input, but we've consulted professionals. I am a professional, I said, my voice steady. Licensed by the state. I helped draft Franklin County's stormwater codes. The room went quiet. For a split second, I thought I'd broken through. Then Roger chuckled, leaning back in his chair. Well, if you wrote the codes, maybe that's why the county's such a mess. A few residents snickered. Margaret didn't laugh, but she didn't stop them either. I set the reports on a table and left, the door clicking shut behind me. Back home, I stared out my kitchen window at the trail's edge, where a new welcome sign glowed under a street lamp. They'd built it on a low spot, ignoring the soil's natural slope. I'd warned them. I'd tried. But you can't make someone hear what they refuse to respect. I printed 2 more copies of my plan and mailed them, one to the county's Public Works Department and one to the state floodplain office. Not out of spite, but because water didn't care about HOA politics. It cared about gravity, and the skies were getting heavy. 2 days later, I was raking leaves in my front yard when a pickup truck with the HOA's logo pulled up. 2 workers in navy polos unloaded bags of mulch and a wooden sign wrapped in plastic. Willow Creek Trail grand opening, Saturday. The irony wasn't lost on me. I walked over, nodding to the older worker, a guy with a gray beard. Did the contractors follow stormwater specs for this area? He shrugged. We're just volunteers, sir. HOA told us to spread mulch and put up signs. Volunteers, building a flood trap without knowing it. Over the next week, I watched more changes unfold. A restroom pavilion went up near the creek, its foundation laid on unstable clay. Paved paths curved too close to the water's edge. Solar lights were driven into soggy ground that shifted underfoot. I stopped a landscaper one afternoon, a burly guy with a clipboard. You got an erosion plan for that ridge? We follow HOA specs. Take it up with them. I did, I said. They ignored me. Not my problem, he muttered, turning away. Not my problem. I'd heard that phrase too often at collapsed bridges, at flooded subdivisions, at disaster sites where the cleanup crews arrived too late. It was the anthem of bad planning, the shrug of those who thought liability ended with a signature. But the water didn't read contracts. By late April, the HOA was in full celebration mode. Newsletters boasted about Camp Cottonwood, a summer program for kids, with tents and a stage built in the trail's lowest basin. They'd cleared brush from the hills, uprooting trees that held the soil in place. I noted it in my journal. Exposed roots, 40 feet from trail, 12 feet from runoff channel. Collapse risk. I sent one final email, copying the county and a local reporter, attaching every map and photo I compiled. No reply. Instead, the HOA newsletter included a jab. Residents are encouraged to trust our board's decisions. Unqualified interference hinders progress. Unqualified. That word burned. I'd offered free expertise, not control. They fined me $50 for unauthorized distribution after I left plan copies in the community center. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was so predictable. This wasn't about safety anymore. It was about egos, images, and the HOA's need to look infallible. But cracks were spreading beneath their polished surface. On a humid May morning, my weather app showed a monster forming in the Gulf, a slow-moving storm pulling moisture north. The forecast called it a once-in-a-century event, predicting 8 inches of rain over 48 hours. I called it inevitable. I stood on my porch, watching clouds gather like an army on the horizon, and murmured, "Here it comes." The air felt thick the next day, heavy with the promise of rain. I spread my old watershed maps across the dining table, tracing the paths water would take when it hit. From the ridge above the trail, it would surge through 2 paved-over gullies, pool in the basin, and carve its exit when it found none. I sent one last email, subject line, "Urgent, close trail before storm." I attached flood models, photos, and a plea to cancel the camp opening. Margaret's reply was swift. "Mr. Carver, the trail meets HOA standards. We advise against spreading misinformation. The camp opening will proceed, weather permitting. Regards, Willow Creek HOA." Weather permitting. As if nature cared about their schedule. I decided to document everything. I charged my camera, labeled SD cards, and walked the trail one last time before the storm. The air buzzed with static. I filmed the clogged swale, the sloped parking lot, the stage teetering on soggy ground. At the basin, I pressed my hand into the earth. Water seeped around my fingers. The soil was already saturated, ready to give way. The rain started at 3 a.m., a soft patter that grew into a relentless roar by dawn. By noon, the ditches along my street were overflowing. My drainage system gravel-lined and carefully sloped held firm, but I couldn't stop thinking about the trail. The camp signs were still up, and parents were unloading gear under umbrellas. I called the county's non-emergency line, gave my credentials, and asked if they'd sent inspectors. The dispatcher promised to pass it on. By 2 p.m., the storm turned vicious. Rain fell in sheets, driven sideways by gusts that shook the trees. From my office window, I saw whitewater churning across the trail where no stream should be. The stage tilted, one corner sinking into the mud. Sirens wailed. A crack echoed the bridge giving way. An HOA worker ran past, shouting into a radio, "The trail's gone." I grabbed my raincoat, camera, and old county badge, no longer valid but useful in chaos. At the trail entrance, the parking lot was a lake. Cars floated, bumping into each other. Parents screamed for their kids, trapped in collapsing tents. Firefighters waded through thigh-deep water, pulling children to safety. The restroom pavilion had caved in. The basin was a muddy whirlpool. Margaret stood at the edge, her raincoat soaked, her face streaked with mascara. She saw me but said nothing. I raised my camera and recorded. This wasn't just a disaster. It was proof. The rain sound that night was different, deep, heavy like the earth groaning under too much weight. I stood past the fire truck barricade, watching the trail vanish under brown torrents. The bridge was gone, wedged downstream against a tree. The gravel path was shredded into trenches. Volunteers shouted useless orders. Kids clung to soaked sleeping bags. A mother knelt, freeing her son's arm from a tent flap. I flashed my badge and slipped into the chaos. An EMT pointed northeast. Kids in the tool shed. Water's rising. They're stuck. The shed was flimsy, leaning under the wind. Inside, 5 kids huddled, shivering. "We're getting you out," I said, wrapping my jacket around the smallest, a girl of about 7. I carried her through the flood, then went back for the others, one by one, as the water climbed past my knees. By the last trip, the shed's door had ripped off, spinning away. Back at the staging area, Margaret stared, her voice barely audible. "You warned us." I didn't reply. I helped move the kids to a warming tent and kept working. By midnight, the storm raged harder. The creek, once a gentle trickle, roared like a beast, fed by runoff with nowhere to go. The restroom's foundation dissolved, its walls crumbling. The stage's debris was scattered across the neighborhood. At 1 a.m., the county declared an emergency. I sketched flow paths for the fire chief, marked at-risk culverts, and flagged 4 homes for evacuation. No one from the HOA questioned me now. Margaret sat in a chair, blanket over her shoulders, staring at the floor. By dawn, the rain eased, revealing the wreckage. The trail was a scar of mud and splintered trees. A 15-foot sinkhole swallowed the parking lot, one car upside down in its depths. A news chopper buzzed overhead. I gave a brief interview, calm and factual. The trail ignored basic drainage principles. I submitted warnings. Had they been followed, this could have been mitigated. My inbox filled with messages by noon, including one from the county. "Mr. Carver, your documentation is under review. We're investigating HOA negligence and request your expertise for site assessments. Respectfully, James Whitaker, Franklin County Flood Control." I exhaled, the weight of months lifting slightly. I hadn't wanted glory, just safety. The silence after the storm was heavy, not peaceful, but stunned. The air smelled of mud and gasoline. Residents wandered the site, phones out, capturing the twisted bridge, the shattered benches, and the flooded kiosks. They weren't just shocked by the destruction, but by the betrayal of a board they trusted. Ellen, the events coordinator, stood in the mud, whispering, "This was our big summer." A woman in a green coat spun toward her. "You knew about the warnings, didn't you? You read his emails." Ellen stammered, "I'm not the president." "Don't give me that," the woman snapped. "You all thought you were untouchable. Look at this." A man held up my drainage report, its pages creased but intact. They called this meddling. Now it's evidence. The crowd grew, voices sharp. At the emergency HOA meeting, held in the debris-strewn parking lot, Margaret stepped onto a crate to speak. We never expected. You ignored him, a voice shouted. You find him, another added. Phones flashed my emails, their timestamps glowing. Margaret tried again. We followed vendor advice. You cared about optics, not safety, the green-coated woman said. A retired cop, Henry Walsh, stepped forward. This is negligence, Margaret. My granddaughter was in that camp. She's got stitches because of you. The word negligence hit like a bomb. Margaret stepped down, silent, as calls for a board suspension rose. A petition circulated. She walked away, coat flapping, across the wreckage she'd once championed. That afternoon, an insurance investigator, Paul Reed, arrived at my home with a briefcase of documents. Your paper trail is ironclad, he said, flipping through my reports. Every liability leads back to your warnings. Then you know this wasn't an accident, I said. He nodded. They're facing full exposure. Lawsuits, maybe personal liability. Good, I said. Kids nearly died. He asked for my testimony. I was ready. That night, the HOA website crashed. Residents posted screenshots of scrubbed board pages, but the truth was out. I watched the sky from my porch, clouds lingering like a bruise. I thought of the kids in the shed, the tents torn apart, and water that followed its path through the HOA's lies. I'd kept every thinjamails, photos, notes in a binder I called the archive. When Paul left, he took copies, digital and printed. I wasn't just testifying. I was ending this. The next morning, a county official, Laura Bennett, knocked on my door, her boots muddy. I'm leading the HOA investigation, she said. Your name keeps coming up. We talked for 2 hours. She studied my binder, smiling faintly. This is courtroom ready. Experience, I said. Being right means nothing without proof. She handed me her card. The county attorney will call. Your work's setting a precedent. She paused. The vendor they used? Expired license. Of course. That evening, I walked the trail's remains. Cleanup crews marked hazards with tape. The air stank of rot. Residents no longer avoided me. Some thanked me quietly. An older couple left muffins on my porch. A teen asked to interview me for a school project. A woman, tears in her eyes, said, if you hadn't spoken up, I couldn't shake the hollow feeling. Speaking up hadn't been enough, not soon enough. The county subpoenaed me for a hearing. 2 board members resigned, issuing apologies. Margaret didn't. The HOA's lawyers requested a meeting. I didn't reply. At the next meeting, held in the fire station, the room crackled with anger. A man waved my report. You punished him, and now our homes are ruined. The crowd roared. Someone shouted, let Thomas speak. I didn't want to, but I took the mic. I'm not here to gloat. This community's standing is because of warnings, not luck. The HOA made bad choices, thinking consequences wouldn't come. They fined me for trying to help. I don't want revenge. I want accountability. The room clapped, then stood. Margaret slipped out a side door. The county froze the HOA's funds, and the state launched a review. The trail would never be the same, but something better could rise. The investigation began with state engineers and a lawyer, Sarah Coleman, who read my reports. This is damning, she said. I walked them through the wreckage, pointing out failed drains and slide zones. Showing her my first email, she shook her head. They called this fear-mongering? They fined me for posting it, I said. She paused. You kept the letter? Framed, I deadpanned. She smiled. This'll be a case study. The state issued a cease and desist on HOA projects and published a report, a failure of oversight, citing my warnings. It spread online, picked up by newspapers and the mayor's Twitter. Residents spoke on the news. He warned them. They didn't listen. Margaret admitted fault briefly, but the vendor's revoked license sealed her fate. Lawsuits piled up not from me, but from families whose kids were endangered, whose homes were damaged. The HOA's legal fund collapsed. The board dissolved. The city proposed a resident committee to rebuild. I was nominated but hesitated. A woman, Carla Ortiz, brought a petition. We need someone who understands consequences. I joined. We met in the library, blueprints spread out, no secrets. I insisted on bioengineering grain gardens, native plants, permeable pavers. We named it the Carver Protocols, despite my protests. Reconstruction began with volunteers planting sedges and kids painting signs, "Respect the flow." One day, I passed Margaret walking her dog. She hesitated, then approached. "I was wrong," she said. "About everything." "Don't tell me," I said. "Tell the families who lost more." She nodded and walked on. I felt not triumph, but peace. The community changed. Signs read, "Trust experts." Carla's watchdog group audited HOA spending, exposing $50,000 on branding over safety. Town halls overflowed with demands for transparency. Margaret volunteered quietly, staining benches and teaching kids to plant. It didn't erase the past, but it shifted the present. The trail reopened as Cottonwood Path, its old name restored. No fanfare, just people walking and laughing. Carla, Henry, and I watched the sunrise over the creek, now secure in its banks. "You started this," Carla said. "The flood did," I said. "No," she said. "You didn't let us ignore the cracks." The city called it a resilient design model. A poet's quote graced the guide map. "Some lessons fall like rain, tearing down what shouldn't stand. Plan again, and even storms become the path." Other towns wrote, asking for advice. I built a site, Water Speaks Truth, sharing free resources. I walked the trail daily, not to check it, but to feel it alive, breathing, safe. The kids' laughter was back. The community wasn't perfect, but it was stronger. When clouds gathered, we'd be ready. We'd learn to listen. I sat on my porch that Christmas, coffee steaming, the air sharp with pine. I thought of the boy I'd carried, the girl who cut the ribbon, the man who'd called me a nuisance and later sent cookies. We'd rebuilt trust, plank by plank, root by root. The trail wasn't just a path. It was home. What do you think about the story? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below, especially on the themes of negligence and accountability in our communities. Have you ever faced a situation where warnings were ignored, or where someone's pride led to harm? Share your stance. Let's get a real conversation going about how we can stand up for what's right.